Hey everybody! Hope your quarantine dream is going at least as well as it plausibly could under the circumstances. I haven't done a stream in a couple of days because I decided to focus on other things, but I'm doing one now, and I'm sort of killing time because I do want to tweet out the link, so you'll have to bear with me. You can even bear witness. While bearing with me, you can bear witness to me tweeting out the link. So this will be exciting. Alrighty. So the tweet has been dispatched, and the immediate purpose of this live stream, or the immediate impetus, is that I had a column that was published today in the New York Daily News on a theme that I've been mulling over for a while since the end of the Bernie campaign and the subsumation. Is that a word? Let me just make sure that's a word because otherwise I look really good. Subsumption. The subsumption of the Bernie campaign into the Democratic Party institutional apparatus, which is what happened after he endorsed Biden. And really had been happening for some time prior to the official endorsement, which was almost a formality. They had been setting up these joint task forces for some time. Calling them even task forces is a little bit of a hyperbolic overstatement. I don't even know what those task forces necessarily even consist of. But it is clear that there is an appetite on the part of the Biden operation to incorporate elements of the Bernie campaign into the fold. So you see this even on the foreign policy side of the Bernie advisory unit transitioning over to the Biden campaign. And Bernie himself has been effusive in his praise of Biden and in his strong belief in the necessity of his supporters to vote for Biden in November. Now, I think this frantic debate over who you're going to vote for in November, 7 months before the fact, is a little ridiculous. I mean, nobody cares that much who some random YouTuber is going to vote for. I mean, if you're fighting now online over whether some guy who does live streams is going to be pulling the lever for Joe Biden, then maybe you're in a situation where you're focusing on things that aren't all that important. But then again, we're all under quarantine at the moment, or at least many of us, especially those of us in the New York City metropolitan area. So if you have little better to do at this juncture, I don't necessarily blame you. And I'm not one to begrudge fighting online. But when you, I don't know, concoct these really melodramatic narratives over who some guy is going to vote for, and like you put yourself at the center of it, then I don't know, it strikes me as a little odd. But then again, maybe that's hypocritical because I'm sure I've done that on occasion. So anyway, the point of this column today, and I'll link to it in the description box. Maybe I'll actually just tweet it, or sorry, maybe I'll post the link in the live chat right now. And if you have super chat comments, send them my way. I will address them toward the end, as long as they're not preposterous trolling, which of course there's a high likelihood that they will be. Um, so let me just send that out there. As you know, when you watch these streams, you're tuning in to truly high production values, which means random delays. Okay, so I just put the link into the chat. Unfortunately, as somebody just pointed out in the Daily News, for whatever reason, the website doesn't load in the European Union, or it's blocked through some filter. I have no control over that. What you could do is pull up a proxy server and post the link in there from a U.S. server, and you should be able to read it. But I agree that it's really irritating that everything on the New York Daily News is apparently not accessible by design to people in the European Union, or even in the UK, apparently, as somebody mentioned, which is no longer a part of the European Union. So I don't know what the deal is there exactly. Um, but it should be, if you have even the most minimal tech savvy, you should be able to bypass it. I mean, I'm a sort of a troglodyte still on a lot of tech issues, and I don't find it that difficult to bypass those kinds of filters. Anyway, the somewhat provocative thesis, or at least the kind of the guiding question that I'm asking, is why didn't Bernie Sanders wear a flag pin? Now, of course, I'm not going to argue with a straight face that if Bernie had just affixed a small piece of patriotic metal to his coat lapel, that it would have solved all his electoral problems and he would have won the nomination. No, that's foolish. But the notion of a flag pin is a metaphor for what seemed like a transition away in this Bernie campaign of 2020 toward a sensibility that was less embracing of American iconography, of notions of just civic pride, of America as just a notion that can unite and bind together citizens. And you saw some of that in the 2016 campaign, or at least I thought. And admittedly, a lot of this is just sort of impressionistic. I mean, you can't analyze the full scope of every single thing that occurred in the 2016 campaign versus the 2020 campaign, but from my impressionistic vantage point, they did move a little bit away from that kind of homey, heartland Americana feel that was emblematic in a way of the 2016 campaign, and I think explained, at least in part, why the Bernie candidacy in 2016 attracted a surprising to some, but not to me at the time, but surprising to some level of support among, for example, rural voters, conservative voters. So if you look at exit polls in 2016, Bernie overperformed and sometimes outright won the vote among Democratic primary voters who self-described as moderate or conservative, which is why he won, for example, the primary in West Virginia, Indiana, Oklahoma. Did you know Bernie won the Democratic primary in Oklahoma in 2016? You may have forgotten, because it kind of contradicted the narrative of Bernie being this fire-breathing leftist ideologue. That doesn't seem like necessarily a natural fit for Oklahoma. And yeah, you could blame it just on hatred of Hillary, which was the component, I'm sure. But at the same time, there had to be more to it than that. There had to be something about Bernie's overall style and message and platform that made him come to be embraced by portions of the electorate that you wouldn't intuitively think were going to be in line with a democratic socialist. Right? Not a ton of democratic socialists out there in Oklahoma. And so, one feature of that, I think, is just this sentiment that he was able to draw on more fulsomely in 2016, where he was sort of situating himself in a tradition of kind of patriotic American populism. In his case, more of the left-wing variety, sure. But populism always runs the gamut, or it often runs the gamut ideologically, so it can appeal to a wide variety of different political kind of archetypes. and he captured some of that energy in 2016. Um, and the example, like the paradigmatic example of that I keep coming back to is this America ad. Remember this? And I mentioned this in the column. The ad that they put out, TV commercial, online ad called America, where you had the Simon and Garfunkel song America playing over a montage of Bernie sort of traversing his way through all these kind of quintessential American landscapes. And we all gone to look for America. Oh God, you know that song, okay? And that was probably his most well-received ad of 2016, if I'm remembering correctly, because it just captured something that was a little bit difficult to articulate about the nature of his appeal and crystallized it. And I just don't recall anything quite of the same ilk in 2020. And one of my working theories for why that was the case is because that the political dynamics just changed in 2020. I don't think Bernie changed so much. Maybe a little bit around the margins in terms of his emphasis. But the political circumstances changed. There were different exigencies of 2020 compared to 2016. The most prominent of which, of course, was that you're running to unseat an incumbent president, and so it's got to be nonstop, 24/7 anti-Trump broadsides. So Bernie, like pretty much every other candidate, save for, in fact, Tulsi, um, they were all competing amongst one another for who could make the most inflammatory anti-Trump screeds. And with that as sort of like your tonal emphasis, it's not surprising to me that some of the demographics that were gravitating toward Bernie in 2016 subsequently gravitated away from him in 2020, namely the rural voters, the white working class voters, even some of the black working class voters did not go for Bernie, and he got lesser support from them than he did in 2016. So now does that mean, is that all because Biden is just this phenomenal candidate who like just lit everybody on fire and made them super enthusiastic and got them out to vote? Well, probably not. At least that's not the whole story. I actually think there's more. There is some evidence for that outlandish interpretation of Biden's appeal, or at least ostensibly outlandish interpretation that a lot of people on the online left don't want to acknowledge. Like, or in other words, there are a lot of people who do genuinely like Biden and were excited to vote for him, even if you are not, even if I'm not. You got to put yourself in the shoes as much as you can of people in the electorate who aren't of your same inclinations. That's sort of almost a trivial integral facet of any kind of political analysis that has any hope of being accurate or reflecting the sensibilities of the broad populace. But I also think that there was something about Bernie's rhetorical approach, maybe campaign focus, that got away from what made him a novelty or something invigorating in 2016. In 2016, remember, he was racking up these sort of incredible victories that surprised the pundit class and forced them to at least pay more attention to Bernie and to take him seriously as a political force. I mean, when a candidate wins the New Hampshire primary, as he did in 2016 by a total landslide, 30 plus points, I think, then you have no choice but to take whatever movement is propelling that seriously. And then he wins Michigan, he wins Wisconsin, he wins those states that I mentioned, but like Oklahoma, Indiana, West Virginia, and I think the people who are trying to give you postmortems as to why the Bernie campaign didn't succeed, they are doing themselves a disservice if they ignore some of this these factors that I'm at least attempting to elucidate in the form of this column and elsewhere. And I think part of the reason why you didn't see it really much of an embrace of this kind of sense of Americana, of national pride, of civic unity, is that because the iconography of American national honor or patriotism is viewed as anathema amongst the activist left, in large part. And when I say activist left, roughly speaking, I'm talking about this kind of interlocking network of progressive, quote unquote. I hate the word progressive now. I mean, if you're still earnestly using the term progressive to describe yourself, you're kind of just a dupe. I mean, give that up, please. It's so embarrassing. Um, but you have these like professional, progressive with a capital P and a trademark logo organizations who comprise parts of this left network, activist groups, people in the media who have a similar political disposition. And to them, a lot of them, mostly younger but not exclusively, even suggesting, as I did after ahead of the Michigan primaries, the Michigan primary, which was the end of the Bernie campaign. I mean, once he lost Michigan, and didn't just lose it, but lost every county, the campaign was like pretty much officially over. Um, but I suggested at one point, like, why doesn't Bernie just wear a flag pin? I mean, is it that big of a deal? Why would that be so horrible? Somebody says that you worked for one of these organizations, Michael. You're right, I did. The Young Turks, I would include in this network. I'm not denying that. So I don't know how you think that's a gotcha of some kind. I mean, the reason why I can comment with some degree of authority on these people and these groups is because I've been amongst them. Okay? Um, but the question that I posed is like, would it really be that horrible for Bernie to wear a flag pin? And if so, like, why is that so horrible? Because in the online left world, there is a strong commitment to the value of various symbolic gestures. But the symbolic gestures that are viewed in a positive light or even demanded by members of this left activism world tend to be symbolic gestures around issues of personal identity. So race, gender, sexual orientation, that sort of thing. The most prominent among them being this idea that everybody's got to proclaim their pronouns. Now, Bernie, to his credit, didn't do that, to my knowledge, over the course of this campaign. Like, one of the few triumphs of the Bernie campaign is that the millennial advisors and operatives in and around Bernie world didn't succeed in like badgering him into expressing his pronouns at any point, as if anybody was ever confused that Bernie identifies as a male. But other candidates did do so, like Elizabeth Warren, who had the she, her in her Twitter bio. Cory Booker did it. Julian Castro did it. Maybe one or two others that I'm not remembering. But that's a symbolic gesture, right? That's a symbolic expression of solidarity with people who you believe are marginalized, like trans people, which is I have no problem with that per se. I think the pronoun stuff is a little bit overwrought and needlessly alienating, but I get the sentiment behind it. So they love symbolic gestures when it comes to that kind of collection of issues. But when it comes to issues of national honor or pride or patriotism, it's like a major source of intense controversy if you would even consider wearing an American flag lapel pin. If you would consider, like, I don't know, praising a bald eagle. If you would even consider, like, singing America the Beautiful or something. I mean, it's so ridiculous how culturally blinkered a lot of these people are that stuff to them, just really generic expressions of American iconography would be regarded by them as such flashpoints. And, they're just symbolism. Why does it bother you so much? Why does it cause you to go on a 72-hour screed about how the American flag is potentially sexist, racist, homophobic, emblematic of predatory capitalism and fascist? Like, is that necessary? And why isn't it that Bernie couldn't even dream of just appropriating that imagery? I don't think Bernie hates America. I think he likes America on some genuine level, which is why he's devoted his entire life to public service, to improving America, right? So, like, then why not just do the very simple thing of incorporating your political project with the truly, almost trivially commonplace symbols of American unity? And yet, when you deal with the online world, left wing activists, media personalities, believe me when I tell you, it's a massive bone of contention. I just tweeted out my column this morning, and yeah, I'll grant that I sort of phrased the tweet in a lightly provocative way, because I'm not saying that Bernie just needed to wear a flag pin and he would have won the nomination, right? But that's sort of the device that I use in the column for trying to illuminate some of these issues. And I just saw it now. Hundreds and hundreds of people going absolutely bonkers over this idea that it's so repulsive for Bernie to even have contemplated wearing the flag pin, because it's some kind of capitulation to fascism or Nazism. And it's just like, are you crazy? Yeah, the Nazis really loved the American flag. The Nazis of 1930s Germany were huge fans of the American flag. Right, that makes a ton of sense. You dopes. And I'm telling you, this is just endemic to the progressive left now. And there have been currents of this on the left for forever. So I'm not saying this is necessarily new, but I'm saying that there has been a radicalization and a polarization and an energization amongst the most devoted elements of the progressive left, who spent a lot of time online since 2016. You had the Democratic Socialists of America gaining in membership. You had a lot of online activity around new media outlets propping up, social media intensity really ramping up since the election of Trump, and the beating heart of it, at least in certain circles, is this left-wing activist world, which is one and the same with left-wing media. I mean, there's pretty much no difference at all between online left-wing media and online left-wing activism. I mean, they're all friends. I mean, that's oversimplifying, but they're in the same social and political cohort for sure. So they don't really have an ability to kind of at least strive to impartially analyze the sentiments animating that constituency. And one of those sentiments, I'm sorry to say, is a disdain for America just as such. And I've tried to clarify for people, I like America, okay? I'm sorry. You know why? Because I was born in America. My family is all in America. Living in America, being a citizen of America, has afforded me a wide variety of advantages that have given me a better quality of life than I had lived in, and if I had grown up or been born in many other places in the world. So I like America in that sense. I like a lot of American people. I like a lot of American custom. I even like a lot of American culture. I don't like a lot of what the American government does. I don't like the sort of superficial corporate pop culture, even though, I'm just as happy as anybody to sing a Taylor Swift song. But a lot of the mainstream corporate culture in America is deadening, for sure. But I have an affinity for American history. I think that there's pride in parts of the American project. Okay? that doesn't preclude me from being a vociferous critic of American foreign policy, of political corruption, etc. But it also doesn't. But that also shouldn't limit me or prevent me from embracing just the basic icons of American civic life, like American flags or Purple Mountain's majesties. I mean, give me a break. Why is that so controversial? It shouldn't be, and if the fact that it is speaks to the political myopia of people in this crowd, who, unfortunately for Bernie's purposes, comprised overwhelmingly the sort of activist and intellectual firmament around his campaign. And I think that's a big reason. I think that's a big explanatory factor in terms of why his campaign lurched in the direction it did, didn't resonate with the voters that it even resonated with in 2016, 4 years ago, and he gets blown out by Joe Biden. I mean, if you want to blame the entire thing on a media conspiracy, fine. That's your prerogative, but there's so much more to it than that. And I'm on a Bernie postmortem tear right now. So if you're annoyed with me talking about these things, then you might as well turn off the live stream, unfollow me, ignore me, pretend I don't exist, denounce me, and disavow me, because I feel like this is a really actually an important subject. And so, this is just the first installment today in the New York Daily News. I got another thing coming out tomorrow, which I'll do with my own a separate video on, and I got another big thing coming out, and maybe even more. Okay, so I am not satisfied with these oversimplified, reductive, really rationalizations about how, the corporate media, didn't, he couldn't, they destroyed Bernie. Were elements of the corporate media hostile to Bernie? Yeah, sure. But at the same time, over 4 years, he had proven himself to be a formidable political force, so they couldn't just ignore him. They couldn't black him out like they did in 2016. The DNC couldn't hide debates on Saturday nights like they did in 2016. They couldn't preemptively merge operations with Joe Biden's campaign like they did with Hillary in 2016. They didn't coordinate Biden. All that happened was, when Biden gets a 30-point victory in South Carolina, then two other candidates who are more aligned with him than they are with Bernie drop out and endorse Biden. Okay, I mean, was it unprecedented in the sense that it was swift collective action taken by Democratic elites? Yeah, it was unprecedented in that sense, but it wasn't truly unexpected. Okay, so if the Bernie campaign really was that tenuous, that Mayor Pete and Klobuchar endorsing Joe Biden after he wins 30 points in South Carolina was like its death knell, then that speaks to some more intrinsic problems with the Bernie campaign that are being glossed over and ignored. I mean, the guy won 46% of pledged delegates in 2016. That's hugely significant. The establishment was splintered in 2020. And the establishment is sort of an amorphous concept to begin with. Why did 28 people run for the nomination, or 26? 26 or 28. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the final number was actually 28. Why did 28 people run for the Democratic nomination if it was just a foregone conclusion that Joe Biden was going to win? I mean, don't give me a freaking break. It's so preposterous. Why did Bernie bother running in the first place? If it was just inevitable that the establishment was going to, kneecap him and destroy his campaign. No, he thought he could win, of course. I thought he could win. I thought Biden was stronger than much of the punditocracy assumed, but I thought that Bernie was strong in his own right and could have won. But he didn't. And so it's incumbent on those of us who are interested in these things and find them important to figure out the reasons why and not just make excuses or whine. And in terms of this sort of embrace of American iconography, Tulsi did that. She wore an American flag pin. She's a military veteran. People know that. She's fluent in the language of patriotism. I'm not saying everybody's got to be like Tulsi, but I'm saying, why not? And yet she still advocated a largely left-wing policy agenda. Yeah, heterodox in certain ways, but more or less a left-wing policy agenda, much more so than every other candidate, for example, on healthcare, other than Bernie. She was the only candidate who advocated single payer to the end, aside from Bernie. And guess what? She had conservatives and libertarians who were supporting her because they felt like she wasn't culturally alienating to them. Now, did Tulsi win the nomination? No. I never told you that it was likely that she was going to win the nomination. Okay? She was abused by the media establishment. They did tell lies. They did try to kneecap her. They did overwhelm her. But there are times when I feel like if you just put Tulsi's into Bernie's body or something, or if you put her outlook into Bernie's brain in terms of some of these issues around American idealism, right, or civic unity, then maybe things would have been different. It's hard to say, but it's something that I think is really worth thinking about seriously. And if you think that Bernie just ran for president despite having zero chance of winning, like he just enjoys running for president at age 78, then I think you're delusional. I think he could have won. I think he believed he could have won, and I agree with him. And it didn't work. And therefore, it's necessary to discuss these things. But please read the article. It's not that long, and yet I have hundreds of people just are reacting to it online right now furiously, clearly without having bothered to read it. All right, so I have some super chats. Saul says, leftism is for the nationalism of others. See the left support of theocratic fascist parties in the developing world so long as they're anti-Western. I don't really agree with that. I think that's at least maybe there's an element of truth to that, but it's oversimplified. There are certainly left nationalism strains throughout the world that have been successful. Saul adds, they are instinctively anti-patriotic because what patriotism has been used for war, but they don't understand that it's worth building unity. Yeah, I think that's right. Again, I'm almost, I am largely just anti-war in every instance, but there have been anti-war groups who have been patriotic in their advocacy of why they are anti-war. I mean, look at the paleo-conservatives, most of whom are anti-war. They're very much comfortable in merging their sensibilities with those of American custom and honor, and again, just the basic iconography of civic life, which the left is allergic to, for the most part. First name, last name says, since it's obvious that Biden is senile, why aren't more journalists investigating who is actually pulling the levers of his campaign and who will actually be in charge if he's elected? Okay, so you say it's obvious that Biden is senile. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's obvious that he's senile. I think that it's obvious that he's undergoing or has undergone cognitive decline. There's no doubt about that. Anybody with a pair of eyes and a pair of ears can ascertain that about Biden. Go watch his older debates in 2008 and even 2012 when he's obviously much sharper. But that doesn't mean he's senile. I think when you say he's senile, you're really making a stretch. If you're senile, then you need to be in a nursing home. Biden can still articulate thoughts. As competently as he could 20 years ago? No. But he's not senile. Okay, so maybe don't exaggerate things if you want to convey whatever point you're trying to convey. Why are you laughing? 418 says, are you still dismissive of the Tara Reid story after the Biden campaign coordinated with the MIT and other outlets to narrative manage it away? I am skeptical of it, and I don't think it's been established as a legitimate accusation. I'm sorry. I know that a lot of people love to make the liberal hypocrisy point where they're saying, oh, what about the people who said believe all women? What about this woman? Okay, well, I never said believe all women. You can go look at my commentary during the Kavanaugh hearings where I said, look, I'm opposed to Kavanaugh, but not because I think not because I'm finding him guilty of a decades-old allegation from when he was 16 or 17 in the summer with this woman who claims that she was assaulted or attacked by him. I think that the evidence there is not conclusive, and even if it were conclusive, I don't know that it should necessarily inhibit somebody from being a Supreme Court justice. I thought some of Kavanaugh's conduct over the course of that hearing was discrediting. Like when he testified and went on a blithering emotional tirade, almost breaking down into tears because of the allegations against him. At the same time, the Democratic tactics were preposterous as well. There was so much bad faith all around over the course of that Kavanaugh saga because it was all fundamentally about power in terms of who controlled the Supreme Court. So that's why the logic of the opponents and the supporters of Kavanaugh often didn't hold up. But nonetheless, I don't think it's a sound standard to just say anytime somebody makes an allegation against somebody, it can then be weaponized politically and made into a big brouhaha. I don't think that's sound journalistic practice. I don't think it's sound ethically, and that's my attitude toward this story. Like Tara Reid, if she's to be believed now, I mean, she was actively lying a year ago, and I'm sorry, a first-year law student could pretty convincingly dissect the story that she's putting forward. So, yeah, I'm dismissive of it, or at least skeptical of it, for reasons that I feel are logically founded. Sparky, my good friend, says, "So you freely admit that you are American?" Indeed, sir. Let's see if there's anything else. Joss says, "Could the multitude of candidates obedient to Obama running be a strategic decision that was coordinated?" I think you're overstating when you say obedient to Obama. I mean, obedient? Is it obedience, or is it that they are deferential to the previous Democratic president who's still widely popular in the party? I mean, sometimes the explanations for these things are a little bit more banal and unexciting than the more slightly paranoid conspiratorial explanations. Okie doke, people. Thank you for joining. Keep up the good work if you're doing good work in terms of your quarantine position. The park across the street from me is still closed. I decided to be a daredevil a few days ago and go into the park unlawfully, despite it being closed, just because I wanted to see what would happen, really. And, the cop I encountered, told me I had to leave, but he was fairly reasonable about it. Said he wasn't looking to hand out fines or make arrests, although he did technically have the power to do so. I asked him how much the fine was. He didn't know. I should actually look into that a little further. I'm interested to know how much Jersey City is going to require people to pay if they enter a park, despite the governor's order shutting them down. And there are a lot of civil liberties issues around this whole lockdown situation nationwide that trouble me. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not anti-lockdown. I think some of these protesters going out and claiming they need to be liberated from the governors of Michigan and Minnesota and Virginia are a little bit unhinged. I just know that the situation in my area is very bad from firsthand experience and also looking at the data. And this idea that there's some kind of global conspiracy to fake or manufacture a virus threat in order to take down Trump, including amongst right-wing leaders the world over like Modi and Netanyahu and others, and it's barely even worth taking seriously. But, I understand why people are frustrated, and it's not something that I thought would have happened. I just heard this morning that a doctor who treated multiple members of my family in northern New Jersey and was well regarded died of coronavirus. So, I guess once you start hearing about people dying who you've met or or in your social circle or professional networks, then it takes on a little bit of a different feel. All right, on that happy note, I will bid you adieu. Please, again, read the article, which will be in the description box. And you know what? Stay safe. Most importantly, stay cool.